It has recently come to my attention a strange tale concerning the mental health condition known as obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, in which a person experiences fixated thoughts and compulsive, repetitive behaviors. It's an irregular story with no clear conclusion, which may prove unsatisfying to some, as many prefer their heroes and heroines to be clear-cut, with no blurred edges. Nevertheless, I believe it's a story worth sharing. It is both interesting and entertaining, and could almost be described as a black comedy, if it weren't so macabre. The manor house stood on a hill overlooking the village of Somerton. It had always been there, or so it seemed to the villagers, at least as far back as they could remember. Their mothers, fathers, grandparents, and the generations before them bore witness to its dominating structure and the dark, menacing atmosphere that seemed to radiate from it. According to historical records, it had few tenants since it was built, and was therefore prone to lengthy spells of emptiness and the inevitable deterioration that occurred between each occupancy. After so many years empty, it yearned for an occupant, someone who appreciated its finer qualities and would do it justice. And so it waited and bided its time. Then, finally, in the autumn of a certain year, two strangers, one of a certain disposition, came to the village and took up residence there. The Dorans, for it was they who were now the new tenants, came from a wealthy family in Eastern Europe. They had left their homeland and decided to settle in England, finding that the manor house in the small village met their needs, at least the needs of Mr. Doran. His wife, however, could have lived anywhere but there. Mr. Doran, a tall, slim man in his 40s, was a gregarious gentleman, friendly and amiable, but socialized only on his own terms. His wife was a solitary, introverted loner. This was her weakness, as her husband held an authoritative grip over her. Though he was friendly, he was also a bully, a gambler, and a drinker. She had spent many years acquiescing to his ways, never daring to countermand his wishes, and was always in fear of rejection and being turned out of the family home. He had lifted her from poverty when she was young and took her to be his wife, much to the dismay of his own aristocratic family. She was aware of the fine tightrope she walked and kept the peace as much as she could. But like a cornered animal, her only last recourse was to fight back. And so it was that after only 6 months of arriving at the manor house, the worm finally began to turn. Her health had deteriorated, and she'd acquired a facial tic that greatly disturbed her. She also experienced repeated blackouts, where she couldn't remember the simplest things. But the one habit she detested the most was her constant, repeated checking of things. She was aware of it and fought against it, but when she did succumb to her OCD, she always seemed to black out or fall asleep, only to awaken with no memory of the recent events. She called her condition the urge. The urge for what? I asked myself, and could only conclude that it meant exactly what it sounds like, a strong desire or impulse. One day, certain events unfolded that finally brought an end to her misery. It happened one early autumn evening. Feeling very alone in the house, she started to search for her husband, hoping for some company and conversation. She was sure he wasn't far, but she couldn't find him anywhere. Not in the house, not in the garden. He just wasn't there. Yet somewhere deep inside, she knew he must be near. But where? She was sitting in a small living room off the main hallway. The coal fire was burning down in the grate, and the sinking sun threw amber colors through the small paned window. It was growing duskier, the light fading fast. The time was approaching 6 o'clock, a time she knew very well. She tensed. It was the time she had to start all over again. She attempted to resist, but the urge within her was too much. She sat rigid and very still in her armchair, putting on headphones to listen to her favorite music, trying to blot out the feeling. But it was no good. The urge was always there. She felt it bubbling up inside her. Her hands clenched the sides of the chair tightly, her knuckles turning white. She closed her eyes, but a voice within her was screaming, "Come and check on me. I'm waiting. Come on, come on." Her eyes snapped open and her fingers relaxed. She had no choice but to obey the summons. Slowly, she got up from the chair and made her way out of the living room and into the hall. Opposite was a small door, set in wooden paneling and situated underneath a wide staircase. Moving hesitantly, she made her way towards it. The only sounds were her footsteps and the ticking of a large clock echoing around the hall. Everything was wooden, the walls and the flooring. Her husband had made sure of that. Obsessed with architecture and structure, he had wanted to capture an older, more ancient feel to the manor. Suits of armor stood in dusty corners, and colorful, heavy tapestries adorned the plastered walls. A large central chandelier hung majestically from the decorative ceiling, completing the picture. The manor house was a foreboding, ageless structure surrounded by acres of parkland. She didn't really want to move there. Her idea was to move in more social circles, in a house fit for that purpose. Detached? Yes, but near other houses. She wanted to get to know the neighbors and strike up friendships. But here, there was only loneliness. Not that her husband cared. He saw it as a matter of snob value. The more you have, the more respect you get. Or so he thought. The trouble is, like so many people with an elitist complex, he soon found out he wasn't liked, much to her chagrin. It was soon after they had moved in that she heard the gossip, the accusing fingers, and sideways glances. When she was by herself, she wanted to break free, to run into people's houses or stop a stranger on the street and say, "I'm not like that. That's my husband, not me." But she never did. So the life she wanted and dreamed of ebbed away, and her feelings towards her husband hardened. She reached the door and drew a key from a small wooden box on a small table nearby. Inserting the key in the lock, she turned it, and the door opened. Darkness fell out of the doorway like a bag of coal, casting an unmoving shadow on the floor. She moved through the darkness, entered the doorway, and flicked on a light switch, illuminating a staircase leading down to a cold and dank basement. Resigned to her fate, she descended. As she walked down the steps, she remembered the first time she had met the people in the village, the special occasion when they had organized an informal get-together to welcome her and her husband. The smiling faces in the village hall, the rows of trestles covered in plastic tablecloths, drinks and sandwiches. The beaming vicar and other important people in the village welcomed them. The village hall was a central point of village affairs, and the old manor house her husband had bought was, for decades, if not hundreds of years, the most important house in the village. In the past, the lord of the manor resided there, but that was a long time ago. Still, traditions take a long time to die, if they ever do, and they were welcomed as soon as they arrived. So, on that auspicious afternoon, they stood facing the people as they walked in through the doors and into the hall. "My wife and I are pleased to be members of this village, so thank you all," she remembered her husband saying as he gave a small speech. "But I beg you not to make a nuisance of yourselves," he chuckled, "and never come to the manor house without an invitation. The house is private, and I do not want to have to ask any of you to leave, especially as we are only just starting to get to know each other." He gave a sickly smile, and the room became silent with a murmuring of voices. "So, I will come to you, to the village, as and when necessary, if that's fine with you. My wife is of a nervous disposition, and I don't want to make matters worse. She is just recovering from an illness, you understand." She remembered looking at him. "What is he talking about?" she said to herself. "Nervous disposition? Illness?" The vicar broke the uncomfortable silence with a cough. "Well, I am sure that we would all like to welcome you to our village, and please, don't stand on ceremony. Take a drink and have something to eat." "Thank you all very much," he said, and at that point they began to mingle with the other villagers. What her husband had said did cast a shadow over the proceedings. She remembered very well the looks some were giving them and the whispering. Her husband, oblivious to it all, talked freely about his life and took an interest in their village affairs, but she felt as if she was some lapdog following him around. Whenever she tried to speak, he snapped back and told her, "Not now, darling. We don't want to bore these people to death." Then it started, the snorting, pig-like laugh, always when he thought something was funny, or when he belittled someone. She was brave enough, she remembered, to whisper in his ear, "Why are you bothering? You don't give a damn about these people." The look was savage. His face twitched. "Excuse me," he shouted over the din of the people. "My wife is suddenly not feeling too well, so I'm so sorry. I will unfortunately have to leave this wonderful party and get her home, but be assured, my friends, that we will have to do this again." He looked at her kindly, but with a glint in his eye, and putting his arm around her shoulder, he escorted her out, giving his apologies for the umpteenth time. Yes, she remembered that very well, and the unrestrained talking to he gave her when she got home. She couldn't go out for a week after he had beaten her. "He's taken a piece of my life and robbed me of my dignity over and over again," she muttered to herself, her footfalls echoing as she reached the bottom of the staircase. In front of her, a wide, low-ceilinged space stretched out, cold and empty. She flipped a second switch, and light flooded the basement, revealing a door set into the far wall. Reaching it, she turned the key and pushed it open. The room beyond was pitch black, smelling of dust and mildew. A low groan broke the silence. She lit an old oil lamp hanging from a rusty nail and adjusted the wick, coaxing a dim, flickering glow into the small space. Years ago, this had likely been a wine cellar, but now it was disused, or so it seemed. The muffled cry came again, and as she stepped inside, the lamplight illuminated an unseen presence. Behind a locked and secured cage was her husband, rocking gently from side to side, his head twitching with strange, spasmodic jerks. He looked up as she approached, holding out both hands in a pleading gesture. "Help me! Help me!" His voice was barely audible, raspy from thirst and layers of dust. He moved closer, his face pressed against the bars. It was bruised and swollen, bloodied and dark. Weeks of growth covered his chin and face, and he was clearly in pain. "Help me! Please help me!" he begged again. She bent closer. "What did you say?" She laughed, cupping a hand to her ear as if she couldn't hear him. As he leaned in, his face against the bars, she looked at him more intently. He had only one ear, and his nose had been torn away, leaving a gaping hole. Suddenly, she saw her opportunity. She grabbed a handful of his hair, and before he could react, produced a knife and swiftly cut off his other ear. Flesh and blood splattered across her and his face. He screamed, a long guttural shriek, and fell back onto the floor. The ear landed with a soft thud, a discarded lump of meat. She breathed heavily, her voice a sharp screech. "You took my life from me bit by bit, so now I'm taking your life piece by piece." She stood up straight and walked out of the storeroom, leaving him gurgling and moaning. She quickly locked the door and ascended the staircase into the large hall, locking that door as well. She then made her way back to the living room. The grandfather clock boomed the half hour, and she was violently sick on the carpet. The urge was finally gone. The vicar leaned heavily on his office table, speaking directly to Mr. Fotheringay and looking him straight in the eye. "I really don't believe it's any of our business, Mr. Fotheringay. I mean, we can't just interfere because they don't come up to village expectations." Mr. Fotheringay replied with a sigh. "Look, it's not that they have any connections here. They arrive out of the blue, taking over the old manor house, where, I might add, generations of the Sawyer family once lived. Old Martin Sawyer, now he was a gentleman, he was, and so were his sons." The vicar interrupted. "Mr. Fotheringay, Tom, if I may be so bold, we have gone over this a few times now, and I can only repeat, their life is their own. I know he's a queer sort of chap." "Queer?" Mr. Fotheringay interrupted. "Queer? Damn right rude, you mean. Giving out orders when he feels like it and treating us as if we were hired laborers. Why, he had my wife in tears a few times, I tell you, and the way he treats his wife. There's gossip and stories around here that will make your hair curl. There's talk he's done away with her, that's what I heard. Well, what we would like you to do is make some inquiries, make contact, go up to the house and see how the land lies, if you know what I mean." Mr. Fotheringay leaned back in his chair and waited for the vicar to answer. The vicar breathed hard. "Okay, Tom, I will do it. Mind you, just a social call. No Inspector Hornsby investigates stuff," the vicar replied. "That's good enough for me, vicar. And if you can just get it across to him to have a little—" "A little what?" said the vicar. "A little respect for us in the village. We don't take kindly to folks like him giving out his orders here and there. We are not his lackeys. That's what I'd like to get across to him." The vicar smiled. "I'll see what I can do. Now, I must get on if you would excuse me." Mr. Fotheringay made his exit and closed the door behind him, leaving the vicar to contemplate matters. After a while he got up to leave the office, but then started to hum to himself. He hummed and tried his best to stop, even banging the table with his fist. "Oh no, not again, please." The merry tune went on. He threw open the office door and switched off the light, banging the door shut after him. But the next second, the door opened again, and he switched the light on again, and then off and on, a half dozen times before slamming the door shut once more. On the other side of the door, the vicar leaned heavily with his back to the door. "I won't open it again. No, I won't. I won't." He walked away as if he were chained to the door, one step forward and two steps back. The walk to leave the church hall was torture, but he finally made it and locked the door, breathing the cold night air into his lungs. He walked away, disappearing into the evening gloom. "There goes the vicar," said an old lady who was walking close by with her elderly friend. "Bloody OCD, that's what he's got. I heard tell that he took all night once just to leave the hall, always switching the lights on and off. You could see it for miles around here. Well, not miles, but you know what I mean. On, off. It must drive you mad." The two mumbled on and continued to walk through the gloom. Night was falling fast, and they soon disappeared. The manor house stood alone, silhouetted against the black, starry sky. The only light came from the moon, which was just beginning to rise, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. An owl hooted, and the rustling of shrubbery indicated that nocturnal animals were on the move. Inside, she had poured herself a glass of wine and was sitting in her armchair, sipping it slowly and contemplating. Her head throbbed with a persistent headache. She jumped. "The phone!" she exclaimed. Instinctively, she reached out and picked it up. "Yes?" she said, speaking softly into the mouthpiece. "Good evening. Is that Mrs. Doran?" a voice on the other end said. "Yes, Mrs. Doran speaking." "Ah, good. It's the vicar from St. Bartholomew's Church. We met at the welcoming party for you and your husband, and then on a few occasions afterward." "Yes, I remember." She paused. "What is it you want?" "Well, I was wondering if it might be possible for me to come and see you and your husband tomorrow, if that's all right with you. Just a friendly social call, you understand. I mean, you are both my parishioners. My husband is away, unfortunately. He did tell me where he was going, but I can't—" She hesitated. "I can't seem to remember, but I'm sure he'll be here soon, maybe tomorrow or the next day or two." "Well," the vicar continued, "I am at a bit of a loss tomorrow anyway, so if you have no objections, I could still come over just to see you. A quick visit." Mrs. Doran smiled. "No problem. Shall we say early evening, around 6 p.m? I know that's late, but I can't make it any earlier." The vicar paused. That was quite late, as he would normally be sitting down for his evening supper at that time, but he acquiesced. "That's no problem, Mrs. Doran. So, I'll see you then. Goodbye." She put the phone down and sat back in her chair, her face motionless. The vicar also hung up, but his hands were shaking. Soon, he was in the throes of repetitive humming, his fingers tapping on the table. Anyone outside the church 5 minutes later would only have wondered at the light from one of the church rooms flickering on and off for the next 30 minutes. Mr. Doran whimpered in his cage, his sanity nearly gone. The pain was an endless, savage pounding, a cutting ache that never stopped. The blood had ceased to ooze from his ear, starting to clot in a sticky mess. He tried to stand, his legs weak, but managed to pull himself up and lean heavily against the bars. He clung to the memory of his last night of sanity. Dinner with his wife, the wine she had so lavishly poured. She'd been all over him. He thought, was it drugs she gave me? Because afterward, all he could remember was waking up in this stinking hole, his head bruised and bloody, his limbs aching. Yes, she drugged my drink. It's the only explanation. And had she dragged him down here from upstairs or thrown him down the steps? It must be. Why? He looked around. An oil lamp, lit by his wife and left in the room, provided a meager light, a chance. He had to get out. Christ, he mumbled, I know I was sarcastic and sometimes rude to her, but do I deserve this? He examined the lock. It was fastened and he couldn't see a key in the room. He tested all the bars, but none was loose. Maybe it was a ruse, a trick. He knew she gave him drink. The glass in his cage was always full, and there was always a plate of food. But was that drugged too? Possibly, since he could never remember her opening the cage to give him the water and food. When she comes again, he mumbled, things will be different. He then sat back in the deepest shadows of the cage and awaited her return. Dawn broke over the village of Somerton. Great autumn mists clung to the rolling hills and rolled over pastures west of the village as the rising sun cast its golden rays across the land. The dew that had soaked the grass and trees was already evaporating. The manor house was quiet. Not a soul stirred. The only sound was the ticking of the clock in the hall. An hour later, though it was still early, Mrs. Doran slipped from her bedroom to the living room. She didn't pause or even glance at the door leading to the basement. Her face was blank, void of all emotion as she made breakfast. The rest of the day was spent pottering around the house and garden, with the hours dragging slowly by. It wasn't until the clock neared 5:45 p.m. that she returned to the living room, sitting rigidly in her chair. Her hands began to clutch the arms of the chair in anticipation of what was to come. She had a vague recollection of a meeting, an appointment, but couldn't remember with whom or when. As for her husband, she knew nothing, yet she felt something horrible was about to happen. The fear within her was overwhelming, making her feel sickly as beads of perspiration formed on her forehead. The urge was returning. Meanwhile, less than a mile away, on the other side of the village, the vicar of St. Bartholomew's Church prepared to cycle to the manor house. The evening was unusually warm for autumn as he mounted his bicycle and rode gently through the country lanes. He thought he had an unenviable task to win the Dorans over to his way of looking at things, but as a man of the cloth, he felt it was his duty, no matter how unpleasant, to at least talk to them. As he got closer to the house, he started to hum again and couldn't stop. Mr. Doran sat in his hovel and waited. He had made a conscious effort to regain control of his spirit, to stay awake and use all his wits to escape this situation. If only she would come, he mumbled to himself. He was thirsty and hungry. Had she forgotten him? Surely she would come soon. The light from outside was already fading, and it was getting colder. 6 o'clock struck from the old clock in the hall, its chime reverberating through the house and into the dining room where Mrs. Doran sat transfixed. Her face, once pleasant, was now hard and emotionless. She moved stiffly out of the living room, across the hall, and through the door to the basement. The urge was pushing her onward. She quickened her pace down the steps, through the basement, and to the old storeroom where her husband was. Taking the key from a cabinet, she swiftly unlocked the door and walked inside. Mr. Doran's heart began to beat faster, but he kept perfectly still, pretending he was asleep, as she moved silently toward the cage and peered in. She gave a cackle. "How are we today?" she said. "I have something for you." He pretended not to hear and didn't move. "Dead, are we?" She laughed. "Best place for you to be." She watched him for a while, but became puzzled. Slowly, she came closer to the bars and peered through them, trying to see through the darkening shadows. Suddenly, in a split second, he moved with rapid speed. As she tried to pull back, it was too late. He had grasped her hand and pulled her arm through the bars. He pushed the arm to the right and heard the bone crack. She let out a howling scream. "The keys!" "The keys! Where are they? Tell me, or I'll pull your arm off." She didn't have to answer, for he saw the small bunch of keys in her other hand and quickly snatched them. Keeping her arm through the bars, he reached for the lock with the keys and tried each one until a key turned. The door of the cage swung open. He was free and stumbled out of the cage as Mrs. Doran fell to the floor onto her knees. Mrs. Doran, howling in pain, pulled herself up from the floor and staggered toward the stairs, one arm hanging loose as if its bones were undoubtedly broken. At the bottom of the staircase, an old rusting meat cleaver hung on the wall. She grabbed it quickly and turned toward her husband, who was just walking out of the storeroom. With a scream, she ran at him, waving the cleaver and making chopping motions. She was quite mad. Mr. Doran fended off her attack as best he could. A single finger was chopped off and his hand was sliced as he tried to take the cleaver from her. Then, with an almighty punch, his fist landed on her face, sending her flying backward and onto the floor. She sprang up instantly and rushed at him again, howling like a banshee. Meanwhile, the vicar placed his bicycle near the front door of the manor house and knocked. When no one answered after a minute or two, he gave the door a slight push, found it unlocked, and slowly walked in. "Mrs. Doran, are you there?" he called out. There was no answer. He stood alone in the middle of the hall, then heard a shuffling sound from the basement door. He moved toward it and opened it. The sounds became louder and clearer, shouting, screaming, howling, and savage hitting. The vicar, who suffered from acute OCD and had managed to control his humming for half of his journey, started again. "Oh no, not again," he murmured. He couldn't stop the humming, but he continued to the top of the stairs and looked down. To his horror, he saw a woman, bloodied and making strange gargling noises, scrambling up the staircase toward him like a crazy animal. At the bottom lay a figure dressed in black. To all intents and purposes, it looked dead, a meat cleaver stuck in the middle of its face. The vicar felt a mixture of fear and revulsion. His eyes started blinking, and the humming from his mouth increased. He saw the light switch on the wall. He looked at the screaming woman frantically scrambling up the staircase, and then back at the switch. He couldn't help it. He let out a scream and reached for the switch, quickly turning the lights off, then on, then off, then on, and finally off again. It was at this point that he tried to pull himself away. He jerked his hand and body back so quickly that he inadvertently slipped on the top step, stumbled, and fell head first down the stairs, colliding with the woman coming up. They both rolled together down the stairs and onto the hard basement floor. Their heads cracked like two eggs hitting concrete. Blood splattered and ran over the floor, eventually pooling into a dark red, sodden mess. Consciousness faded, leaving an unearthly silence. The basement became quiet, and 3 bodies lay still and quite dead as night fell outside. The urge was gone. When the villagers heard of the tragic events, they were, of course, in great shock, especially over the death of their much-loved vicar. The police could not find a satisfactory answer for the deaths, and the coroner's court passed a verdict of misadventure of things unknown. As time passed, Somerton slowly began to forget these tragic events, and a new vicar eventually took his place at St. Bartholomew's Church. I suspect that in years to come, as generations pass away and younger ones take their place, these events will turn into a local legend or myth, a strange tale told at Christmas over the flickering light of a crackling log fire. A story to be read at bedtime for the amusement of those with a morbid sense of humor. To them, it will be only a story, something that happened a long time ago. The manor house, I understand, still stands empty. Anyone interested in the property has always declined to buy it, even after viewing, even if the price was right or the offer was reduced. There was talk of a strange atmosphere in the house, a feeling that something wasn't right. So the house remains to this day unoccupied and locked up. But perhaps that's for the best, and the villagers, I'm sure, would prefer to keep it that way.